You don't wanna call it like it is. You don't wanna feel how you make me feel. No, from the way you move. Said I know from the way you move. You're moving on, 'cause you moved on. You don't wanna call it like it is. You don't wanna feel how you make me feel. No, from the way you move. Said I know from the way you move. You're moving on, 'cause you moved on. Take a break and call me back. You don't wanna live like that. Did you say goodbye? Did you leave in the light? Fake the pain to shake, it's real, but I'm too emasculated to share how I'm feeling. I know. Did I even try? Take a break and have a smoke. How'd you say we used to talk? How'd you say you made you cry? Now it's night and I try, but it's too close. You don't wanna call it like it is. You don't wanna know how you make me feel. Know from the way you move. Said I know from the way you move. You're moving on, 'cause you moved on. You don't wanna tell it like it was. You don't wanna know how you make me feel. Know from the way you move. Know from the way you move. You're moving on, 'cause you moved on. Take a break and call me back. You don't wanna live like that. Did you say goodbye? Did you leave in the light? Fake the pain to shake, it's real, but I'm too emasculated, so I want you. Did I even try? Take a break and have a smoke. How'd you say we used to talk? How'd you say you made you cry? Now it's night and I try, but it's too close. You don't wanna call it like it is. love me back or not, but I can't seem to find the words to say how I miss you. You were only a fan when the songs were for you. But now that the night is almost over, will I see you around? You were only playing this game 'cause you got bored with nothing to do. Oh, you just smoked, stuck sitting in your basement, thinking of me, eyes away to cope. If you walk through the door, you turn to me. Could you find it in your heart? We are creatures of the night, but that don't mean I don't crave your light. If I'm moment a king and push forth, and is your race finally over? Would you come back to earth? You were only playing yourself, I know that it. Now I'm sitting in that basement, thinking of you, eyes away to cope. We are creatures of the night, but that don't mean I don't crave your light. If I foam and fall, I'm just foaming. I'm just foaming for you. I'm just foaming. I've got nothing to. I'm just
All right. Good evening, everyone. Yeah, you can clap. It's beer and cheese time. It's beer and cheese time. My name is Chris Anderson. You may have seen me on your favorite PBS station as the host and executive producer of Science Around Cincy, a show that teaches kids science by interviewing the coolest scientists and engineers in town. I also host and produce Outsider Classroom, which also teaches kids science, but in our national parks. You can check out all our videos for free on YouTube, but today is not about the kids. School's out, baby. All right. Put those babies to bed. Today, we're going to talk, learn, and consume beer and cheese. We really got 3 goals for you guys tonight. 1, learn a little bit about the microbiology of beer and cheese making. Be able to make your own beer and cheese pairings, which is not only tasty, but will surely impress your friends and family. And of course, have fun. Drink good beer, eat good cheese. I am joined tonight by an esteemed panel of panelists. So before we tuck in, let's do some brief introductions. She's the founder and owner of the Rhine Cheese Shop in Findlay Market, a certified cheese professional and the cheesiest scientist in town. Give it up for your friend and mine, Stephanie Webster. Also joining us tonight is biochemist and certified beer judge. She's also the director of Outsider Classroom. The girl's so nice they named her twice, Mary Ellen Finnegan. And finally, we have master beer judge. I was corrected on that earlier today. Representative to the American Home Brewers Association with over 25 years of home brewing experience, Roxanne Westendorf. We've got a great show for you tonight. Arcade Fire is here. I'm just kidding. I just always wanted to host Saturday Night Live, and this is my way of pretending I could do that. So let's talk beer and cheese. Before we get started, we're going to do a little science experiment that Mary Ellen is going to walk you through.
Yes, so if you would indulge me, you should find a red candy hidden at the top of your cheese plate. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through this. It might be tucked under in the front of the table. Yep. So we're going to do this as one. We're going to unwrap this candy. We're going to check it out and appreciate its red color. We're going to pinch our noses. And then we're going to pop it in our mouths and, experience the flavor. Think about it for a second, like red in nature. Maybe it's cherry, maybe it's raspberry. And then when you're ready, you're going to release your nose and hopefully experience flavor. So we just wanted to use this as a chance to talk about, your sensory experience. Obviously, you think about taste right away, but scent plays a whole big part of that. What your eyes are seeing plays a part in that too. So just to really ground ourselves before we try this wonderful beer and this wonderful cheese, appreciate all that our other senses are doing as we experience the taste.
And of course, put your mouth full of cinnamon before you try beer and cheese, which is always really great.
We'll not be offended if you spit it out and keep moving.
So our lineup here tonight, feel free to follow along with us. Our journey will go from left to right, just like an algebra class, except the mustard should be kind of at the top right-hand corner. They didn't teach you that during PEMDAS, but you can go at your own pace. Feel free to try beer and the cheese kind of on your own thing. If you're the person who likes to wolf everything down, wolf everything down. But just as long as you enjoy your food or drink, we do recommend tasting your beer, eating the cheese, and then tasting the beer. Again, that is the recommended method of tasting. So we're going to start tonight with the Cartridge Enigma and the Tulip Tree Creamery hops. And as you guys are tasting, Roxanne, I'm going to ask you a quick question here. What kind of beer are we tasting here with the Cartridge?
All right, so the Cartridge is really interesting. It's called Enigma, and it's a fruity tart ale. You got some color in there. You can see it's got a little bit of pinkish hue to it, but it's mostly golden. It's a Belgian-based style, which means there is some spiciness in there. Usually, we think of that spiciness as black pepper, maybe a little clove. You should start smelling that, but you're also going to smell a heavy fruit component. So you're going to be smelling the pink guava, the raspberry, maybe a little strawberry. And then there's a tartness. So you may be able to smell some of the tartness. You're going to taste it. They actually used a second yeast. It's called Philly Sour. Yeah, people in the brewing industry know what that is. But it's basically a yeast that actually imparts a sour flavor to the beer. So we're going to be using this with the first one. It's not a high alcohol beer. It's only 4.5%. So when you can taste it and start thinking about those flavors that you have in there, so that little bit of spiciness or pepperiness, the fruit that you get in there, the tartness.
Stephanie, tell us a little bit about this cheese. It is quite creamy.
Yes. So this is hops from Tulip Tree Creamery right in Indianapolis. What's very, very cool about this cheese is that the guys from Urban Artifact and I sent Tulip Tree Creamery their last year's Missing Linck beer, and a few months ago at this point, and they added it to the cheese. So it has the Missing Linck beer added to it, which is very cool. It's a double cream, so the cheesemaker has added cream to make it ultra, ultra creamy. The bubbles in the beer really cut through all of that fat, and the guys at Tulip Tree Creamery always just say it's the best snacking cheese.
So, Stephanie, I guess why or what does using the beer do for making the cheese and maybe the flavors of the cheese?
So a good pairing always, should enhance both the cheese and the beer, or the partner, whether it's wine or beer. We do a lot of cheese and wine, but a lot of people say that beer is a better pairing with cheese. It's got acidity. It's got bubbles. Bubbles act as your own scrubbing bubbles to wash that fat away. The cheese kind of dampens the taste of the alcohol, and it lets you taste past the alcohol, which I think is really, really apparent in a couple of these pairings, which is really, really cool.
So, Roxanne, why start with this pairing
Well,
then?
yeah, we talked about it, and often you'll know when if you've been to a place and you do a flight of beer, you start with the lightest flavor beers, and go to the fuller flavor beers. You start low hops, go to high hops, things like that. And with this, we thought that it was actually more important to start with the cheese and determine the order by the cheese as opposed to the beer. Because some of the cheeses, as we go along and they get somewhat stronger, it's going to overwhelm your taste a little bit if we try and go backwards on the cheese. So that's why we started with this one. And as you start to taste this, you should have seen some differences in the taste of the beer and a little bit in the taste of the cheese as you did your back and forth. That ability to cleanse the palate meant that every time you tasted the cheese, you could still taste the cheese, that you didn't have that accumulation of fat on your tongue. But the beer kind of like smoothed everything out. Like the beer is great on its own, but the flavors almost blended together and got smoother after the cheese. And that's really the sign of an awesome pairing. And we'll be talking about some principles a little bit later that you can use when you're doing your own.
So as you guys are tasting, let's take a trip back in time to your 6th grade science class. And if you can remember, you don't actually have to imagine yourself as a 6th grader because that's probably not pleasant. I know it's not for me. Mary Ellen, what is yeast? We're talking a lot about yeast and what it does. What is yeast to begin with?
Yeah, so yeast is actually a fungus, and I know for me personally, when I think of a fungus, mushroom is something that comes to mind, obviously. But when we're talking about single-celled fungi, we're talking about yeast. And so the yeast is really part of the powerhouse of turning the sugars in the beer into the alcohol that we really appreciate. And they can also add a lot of fun flavors to beverages themselves. So maybe yeast is like an underappreciated single cellular organism.
That's so true. Roxanne, what are some things that yeast can bring to the beer? Obviously, alcohol does that,
Yeah.
which is great for us. What are some other things that yeast can bring to beer?
Yeah, so we kind of joke, it's like yeast basically eats sugar and poops out CO2 and alcohol. It's simplified.
Which is a trick.
But that's actually kind of what happens, right? But when you think about what does the yeast do besides alcohol, the yeast will produce esters. And you say, what's an ester? Well, all your fruity flavors are pretty much esters. So if you get a little bit of orange or a little bit of apple in a beer that has no spice, like no oranges or apples added, Those are esters, and those flavors are being created by the yeast. The yeast, certain yeast can also create those peppery, banana, clove types of flavors depending upon kind of what else you did to the beer. But again, in the absence of actual clove, actual pepper, actual bananas. So they're really responsible for creating a lot of those types of flavors that you're used to seeing in beer. There are a bunch of different strains of yeast that are used for fermentation. People think about, ale and lager, but within ale, there are dozens. Within lager, there are a number. And then there are some crazy yeasts, which we'll get to later with another beer.
Which is very exciting. So it sounds like those yeast really do put together a lot of chemicals that make our beers very specific flavors based on what type of beer that is.
Right, and there's a nice little, there's all kinds of fun diagrams that go into it that are really detailed, and we do not want to be looking at those here, I promise.
Yeah. One thing I like, though, is going back to our first experiment, is a lot of times yeast can also contribute to what you're smelling in the beer. So some of those esters can start to come out, and you can start smelling those things in addition to tasting them.
And behind us, you have a picture of our featured microbe here today. They do all the hard work for the food and beer that you're enjoying. Stephanie, what can yeast do for cheese?
So for cheese, it's a lot of bacterial action, which is different than yeast. But there are yeast added to cheese as well, and that's really kind of what forms the rind, are actually the molds in the cheese. And sometimes those are added, sometimes they're ambient, like in a cheese cave. They exist, and so they like to grow on the cheese rind and form the cheese rind. But they add generally like toasted, bready, kind of yeasty notes. Both bacteria and yeast really, really important in the cheese making world.
Well, speaking of cheese, let's move on to our next beer and cheese. This is the Humble Monk Goldie Links with the Sasquatchy Cove Creamery. Stephanie, tell us a little bit about this particular cheese and how it might pair with this beer.
So next we have Walden. So if everybody's looking, at their plate, it's the second cheese, the one toward the bottom. So then there's the third cheese is the really stark white one toward the top there. So it's called Walden. Just like Chris said, from Sequatchie Cove in Tennessee. These guys are all about terroir, so they make cheese from their single herd.
That sounds like a really cool word.
Terroir. Any wine drinkers? There's terroir in beer, right? So terroir is just taste of place. And you achieve that by using the ambient kind of molds and bacteria that exist in that environment. Along with lots of other things, the weather in a certain area can affect terroir. But it's just, if you're drinking Burgundy wine, it should taste like Burgundy wine because of the terroir. And so cheese is the same. Cheese has terroir too. And it really comes out when you're using grass-fed cows. So if you can even see in the last two cheeses how yellow they are, that is not an added color. That is because those cows are on grass, and the beta-carotene in grass converts to that yellow color in cow's milk specifically. Don't eat goat or sheep cheese. That's yellow. That'd be bad. But cow's milk, all good. And even the second cheese, Walden, has a little bit of that yellow tint, right? It's not stark white like the goat cheese that's next to it. So grass-fed cows from a single herd, from a single place, that then the milk is not transported very far. The cheese is made right there on the farm. There's all that ambient mold and bacteria there contributing to the terroir, the flavors of that place. And so these guys are just champions of terroir. They want their cheese to taste like it came from Sequatchie Cove, and it does. I can always tell in all of their cheeses, if I blind tasted them, where they come from.
Well, that's really cool. I didn't know that the color of the cheese was in cow's milk was because of the grass. I guess one of my next questions, Stephanie, is our first two cheeses are from cows. What can using different milk sources do for the cheese that you make?
So cheese can come from 4 different types of milk: cow, goat, sheep, and in the Western world, We also eat water buffalo milk cheese. So you might have had buffalo mozzarella. That is not a name brand. That is a water buffalo milk cheese. They all have different levels of fat and sugar and other, kind of proteins that contribute to different flavors. And as we know, bacteria and yeast like to eat up those sugars, so lactose in milk, and convert it to other aromatic compounds. And so you'll definitely taste. So we have 4 cow's milk cheeses, and then next we're gonna go to a goat, and you'll definitely taste how the milk components contribute to flavor.
That's super interesting. As you guys are enjoying your beer and cheese, we're going to actually talk a little bit about how you even go about making beer to begin with. So, Mary Ellen, what are kind of walk us through the basics of maybe the brewing process?
Yeah, so if you want to advance the next thing? Yeah, we're going to go with like the mile high view here. We're not going to get too much into the nitty gritty. But if we're thinking about just like the 4 main components in beer, number 1 by volume is actually that water. So when Stephanie was talking about the terroir of a place for a cheese, we can also think about that for beer. Like, what's the mineral content that you find in a particular region that might be going into the beer? Personally, for me, Guinness is one of those things. You're like, why does Guinness taste so much better in Ireland? And like, yeah, you're in Ireland drinking a Guinness, and that's pretty cool. But part of it is like the water that's of that place. That is giving a Guinness in Ireland its distinct flavor versus like even people say like, oh, even across the pond and like other parts of in the UK it doesn't taste as good as like on Ireland's soil, and in part it has to do with that water. Then thinking next about the grains that we're going to use, and we're going to get the sugar that our yeast friends are converting to CO2 and alcohol for us. And then we have our hops, which is our bittering agent. So if you were just looking at like the grain itself, it can contribute a lot of sugar. So without this hops to balance it out, you can have like a very sweet beer. And then of course, the reason we're all here today being yeast. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna start with our malt, and we're going to put it into like a little water bath, and we'll bring it up to different temperatures. And I feel like for me, the most analogous thing is like if you've ever eaten a saltine cracker and you like really chew it, so you don't just bite the saltine and swallow it right away. If you really chew it, it starts to almost become sweet, and that's because the digestive process starts in your mouth. You have enzymes in your mouth that are turning those carbohydrates. They're breaking them down into sugars. So we're doing the same thing when we're setting up an environment for our yeast to live in. We are intentionally raising the temperatures, holding it for a specific time to kind of turn on and off these enzymes to get what we refer to as the wort. So once that's complete, you'll boil it, kind of do the enzymes are done now. I have my set liquid that I'm going to throw my hops and my yeast into, and that's setting up like the backbone for your beer. You're going to clarify that, and then eventually we're going to throw those yeast in, and we're going to let them go about their business. And when we give them the right amount of time, we end up with a really tasty beverage to enjoy.
That is a very wonderful and succinct summary of the brewery process. Roxanne, if let's say you were an aspiring home brewer, you were once an aspiring home brewer, now you're an accomplished home brewer, a seasoned home brewer, what do you need to get started? Because this seems like a pretty complicated process of what we have. This is probably what the pros do, right?
Yeah, that diagram is definitely a pro type of diagram. And, from a homebrew standpoint, there are a bunch of different ways you can do it. You can do what we call extract brewing, where somebody's done that mash part for you. So basically you're starting with concentrated sugar water. And that's why I think of wort or the stuff that comes from the grain. It's sugar water. It's not, sucrose. It's kind of a very complicated sugar water that also has flavors in it. But it's basically sugar water. So somebody else can do that part for you. And then you do the boiling and hop addition and fermentation. You can also do various levels from simple to complicated of that mashing process in your house. But if you're getting started, you're probably going to start with the extracts. And what you need is a big pot. Big pot. We personally started with a 5-gallon pot because when you boil this sugar water, it tends to foam. So you we're brewing 3 gallons in a 5-gallon pot to make sure that we don't get stuff all over our kitchen stove. But basically, you need a big pot. You some usually some bags that you can get at a homebrew shop to put your hops in, so you can get them out when they're done. You boil it. You have a carboy or a bucket that you move it into. You add some extra water to cool it down. You make sure it's at a proper temperature. You add your yeast, and you let it go in the dark. The first time I remember watching the bubbles. Oh my God, look, there are bubbles, yay, it's working, right? Yeah, luckily we did not have a very hoppy batch, so that was okay. But, pretty much you need a big pot, you need a carboy, you need a few little transfer things, and a bucket, and then, a way to bottle. You can save bottles as long as they're not twist tops, from your other stuff to bottle, so you don't have to go out and buy them. The best options, if you go to a homebrew shop, you can get starter kits if you don't have the pots, or you can buy some of these extra things. Listerman does beginner classes, which are a couple-hour classes. You get a discount if you end up buying anything there for after the class, and they will take you through step by step, and you can watch a brew process and actually help. And they have a beginner class, which is the extract, and then they have an advanced class, which actually, instead of starting with either like concentrated liquid sugar or like wort sugar, malt sugar, or like a powdered version of that, you actually start with the grains. And they have everything you need there and classes. So, if you want to learn how to do this, I recommend either hooking up with a home brewer or going to one of the classes. There are also a bunch of videos that you can get, the American Homebrewers Association, homebrewersassociation.org. Sorry, it's very long. And some other YouTube videos are out there. You can contact me and I can put you in touch with folks easily if you want to start.
I just had a question. So you mentioned as long as it's not a screw top.
Screw top. So the screw top bottles, you can't reseal them and have them seal adequately. So if you try and use a screw top bottle and bottle your beer, it's going to have leaks and you'll never get it carbonated, and you'll have air in it, and your beer will get oxidized and skunky and not very good. So, or cardboardy, sorry, not skunky. No, so a screw top is the kind you can pull, you can just screw with, you don't need a bottle opener for. So the kind that just screw off with your hand, that's the type of bottle you don't want to use. But
So like what would be on a Bud Light?
Yeah. But like most...
That's right, yeah, boo that beer.
A lot of craft beer does not use screw tops, but there are a few that do. So it's just the type, if you could use your hands only and get the cap off, don't use it. If you had to use a bottle opener, you're good.
Let's we'll have time for questions at the end. We're gonna move on to our third pairing, with the West Side Missing Linck and the Afterglow from Blakesville Creamery. Let's everybody take a little tasteroo here and see how that feels.
Sorry, I just messed with your piece.
Sorry.
Thank you.
So as judges, as you guys are trying this, what sort of flavors and things are you guys experiencing? Got some mms in the crowd.
Any goat cheese haters out there? No, you're my people. All right. Yeah. So this is another really, really cool cheese. So Brett from Urban Artifact sent this cheesemaker some of more beer. And the cheesemaker here did a special batch of washing this cheese in the Urban Artifact Missing Linck beer. So throughout affinage, which is cheese aging, she has slowly kind of given these little cheeses a beer bath every single day until they were ready to scent. And we talked about goat cheese. This is your first goat cheese. Very different, right? Tangy, light, fresh. This is a younger version. As it ages, it becomes more mushroom, more earth. But when it's young like this, it's more lemon, more tang, more kind of lighter, fresher flavors.
Is that because of the acid in the natural acid in the cheese?
It's because the mold in the cheese, as it ages, is doing more work And as it breaks down those proteins and continues to break down the proteins and sugar in the cheese, the paste becomes more like a pleasant, soapy mushroom earth as the microbes do work on the cheese, and it'll continue to do that until it's to the dark side, so not good anymore.
This is, I think, one of my favorite cheeses we've tried thus far. It's got like a George Clinton amount of funk. Like, that's a lot of funk.
And try it with the strawberries.
Yeah.
They're local in-season strawberries that I think they're so great with this goat cheese.
Now that level of funk, that's because they washed it with the beer and the yeast that.
Yep.
is
So
putting that
they've
flavor on.
given it that beer bath every day, and that encourages. It doesn't add a lot of flavor of beer, right? Like, you shouldn't taste this cheese and be like, this tastes like beer. But what it does do is it encourages the growth of a certain bacteria called Brevibacteria. And that's the same bacteria that you have between your toes and in your armpits. And that's why some stinky cheese, and again, this one's young. As it continues to age, it'll get stinkier. That's why some stinky cheese makes people uncomfortable, because it reminds them of parts of their body that maybe they're not comfortable with. But
So be comfortable with your feet is what you're telling everyone.
the smell is always a lot more pungent than the flavor. And even if you can, just take a little bit, on your hand or on your knife, and just give that rind, which is edible, the rind a sniff, and you'll probably pick up some funky smells there. But again, super light and fresh on the palate.
So the nice part about this pairing is that cheese is really funky, but the beer is also pretty darn funky. So Roxanne, tell us a little bit about the funk inside the beer.
So the cool thing about this is a beer that was fermented with the Missing Linck yeast, and then a second yeast was added called Brettanomyces. And Brettanomyces is a yeast that winemakers fear, like really, really fear. But from a beer standpoint, if you want it in your beer, it can do some absolutely tremendous things for flavor. And it will also change as it ages, which is really cool. But we talked about those funky kind of flavors. Well, the same thing happens with Brettanomyces in beer. You get, I call them funky earthy. So when you're tasting this, how some of the other things were kind of bright and everything, you get that earthiness, a little bit of funkiness. People use some other terms, which I hate, so I won't use them, because I think that they set you up in the wrong mindset. But think funky earthy for this. And as this beer ages, that will actually continue to develop. So that funkiness and earthiness will actually get a little bit more sophisticated, I think. But it will also mean that this beer will probably be good for a couple years, which is not real typical in your average ordinary beer world. So it is a very nice yeast, and I think that the funkiness of the two complement each other. So the cheese was kind of funky and a little bit acidic because it was young, and the beer is funky and a little bit creamier, because it doesn't have any sour types of things in it. So the funkiness complements each other, but then that sour versus creamy contrasts a little bit, and I think it's just a really nice combination.
It's textural. Yeah, it's really nice in your mouth.
Yeah, that balance between the two is that's a nice little pairing we have here. So before we kind of move on, Roxanne, tell us a little bit about the Missing Linck yeast itself, because that is a pretty darn cool story, and it's been used in our last couple beers here.
Okay, so Mike can correct me if he feels necessary on any of this, but everybody knows about the tunnels, in Over the Rhine, right? All the tunnels back there. I don't know how many of you have been there and been through some of them. Yeah, awesome tours. Okay, so they also have some maps and stuff of where breweries used to be and things like that. And, Mike and a few other people were looking at a map and said, there's got to be stuff under here. There have to be more tunnels. They just haven't been excavated. They haven't been opened. So I heard a rumor that something about under cover of night with a sledgehammer, which may or may not be true, that Mike went in and broke through the wall, and lo and behold, the tunnels that they knew had to be there were in fact there. But these were tunnels that had not been exposed to people and tours yet. So Mike and Brett, this is the abbreviated version, okay? Mike and Brett and a film crew go in and started swabbing, and they made at least 100 swabs and sent them off to Omega Yeast, which is a yeast company that does brewing yeast. And Omega came back with results. There's one Saccharomyces, in other words, beer strain. So, wow, cool. Let's ramp it up and let's see what happens. And the brewery that it was, where this equipment was called the Linck. There's their names. I can't remember the first names, Joseph or something like that. Linck Brewery.
Joseph sounds right.
Yeah. Frank and Joseph.
Frank and
So I got part of it right.
I will not take credit for finding that space. It's actually modeled management.
We'll give you credit, Mike.
I
That's
don't know.
fine.
The sledgehammer story is so much better, Mike.
This is.
I love the romance of it.
Well, this is. See, here's the thing. This editorializing really is great because I would watch this movie. I think we can cast Dave Attell as Mike Morgan. I think we'd have a lot of fun.
Well, actually, we already have the movie. But anyway, so the Missing Linck, Linck, which is why the spelling, and then of course, you get that, and the visual illustration of the Sasquatch, kind of comes naturally with that. But it's really one of those awesome stories about like looking at the history of the city and trying to figure out. And I understand that they gifted the yeast to the city of Cincinnati. So technically, the city of Cincinnati, I believe, owns the yeast, but it's available to use, and the yeast company Omega Yeast keeps it in the yeast bank. And it's really interesting. It's a part of history. It's not something that many places can talk about or say. So that's I just think it's so awesome that we have the ability to do something like that here in Cincinnati.
It is definitely a unique part of being in Cincinnati is the brewing history and heritage that we've got, and it's really cool that we get to experience that even today. We're gonna
one quick thing though.
Yeah, go ahead.
So is it Discovery Channel or one of those, or History Channel, Underground Marvels? There is an episode of Underground Marvels that they usually do 2 or 3 different stories on one, and Mike and Brett are part of that Underground Marvels show, and they show them in there taking the samples and talking and everything. So I think you can look it up online and find the specific episode. I actually got to see it when it broadcast. I was very excited.
That is
it's
cool.
really cool.
Man, Discovery. We have with us now a 4th guest. That's I want you guys to give a very warm welcome. He's a microbiologist and professor at UC Cincinnati, an overall germ enthusiast. This is Dr. Sinu Apoquin.
Thank you. I'm learning as much as you guys. I do the other part, microbes. But yeah, it's fun to hear all about cheese and wine and beer.
Do you have a favorite microbe?
I do. In fact, lots of them. So I'm funded by the NIH to study Clostridium difficile, which is it's nasty. For those of you who have heard about fecal transplants, so you can actually give poop from one person to another.
So cool.
I say that it's going to be revolutionizing medicine, I would say. The reason I say that is that there have been studies that have shown that if you take poop from one person and give it to another person, you are able to replicate some of the traits that the other person has. So the next time I'm going to come into this life, I'm going to look for someone with a full hair of head, with buff muscles and ripped, and I'll get that person's poop. But long story short, I study C. diff, and that's really one of the model organisms that has driven fecal microbes. And then I also study other things that cause infections. HIV and fungi as well. Candida is one of the things I study.
Well, let's eat some cheese. So, let's talk a little bit about cheese making. Stephanie, could you give us maybe the 30,000-foot view of how cheese is even produced?
Sure. So 4 ingredients. She's very simple. First one, everybody knows, right? Milk. Cultures. So that is our, mold and bacteria. Salt and enzymes. The enzyme that cheese uses is called rennet. Rennet is it's just like any enzyme. It speeds up a reaction that would happen naturally. So if we just let raw milk sit out with cultures, eventually it become cheese, but we need to hurry that up, right? And be able to control it. So we add rennet, and it speeds up that acidification. Then you get curds, you get whey, you separate the curds and the whey. That's the solids from the liquids. You press it in a mold, whatever you want your cheese to look like, and then in affinage, the way that you age the cheese, that's really where all of the flavors start to come out. So depending on what types of mold and bacteria that you use, depending on how you brush it, whether you bathe it, whether you just let it be, that's cheese in a nutshell, really.
How long does it take?
It depends on the type of cheese. So it can take, fresh goat cheese. Oh, do you mean like the actual make? Just a few hours.
If I get
Oh, okay. So fresh goat cheese, no aging. So it's made, you release it right away. Like this Afterglow, that's aged for about 2 to 3 weeks. All the way to 3 to 5 years for Comte or Parmigiano Reggiano. So as the cheese ages, it loses moisture. So those harder, firmer, drier, bigger cheeses can age a lot longer. The small, more moisture cheeses are just a little bit of time. So hops, your first cheese is probably about 6 weeks. And then Walden, a couple weeks. Afterglow, a couple weeks. And then Cornerstone, we're at like 9 to 10 months. So the one we're about to taste. So, yeah.
And if I could shamelessly plug, I believe there's an episode of Science Around Cincy that you could watch, and you can learn to make your own cheese on the stovetop. So
You can't shamelessly
if you
plug.
if you leave inspired today, you can find both Chris and Stephanie on YouTube. And
Which
follow along with
I
them.
do make my own cheese, and it's like pretty cool.
Yeah.
It is.
Milk is a miracle.
It really
It
is.
is. Yeah.
Sinu, I have a question for you. So we've been talking a little bit about microbiology. So first of all, what is an enzyme? We talked a little bit about rennet being an enzyme. What is an enzyme?
So enzymes are things that drive reactions, chemical reactions. So what happens is they're mostly proteins, and what happens is a chemical reaction would go from maybe one chemical to another, but an enzyme would catalyze that, so would speed it up and facilitate that. So that's what enzymes do, and they're very specific. Like you would have an enzyme that would look for what we call a particular substrate. So it's going to take a particular reaction and drive that reaction. And that enzyme can drive multiple reactions sometimes, but they know which reactions to drive and which reactions not to drive.
So we're going to move on to our next pairing here. This is the Carillion Missing Linck with the Parish Hill Creamery Cornerstone. Everybody, let's take a little trip on this pairing.
Make sure you taste the beer first.
What kind of flavors you guys got out of that beer? No, I'm really comfortable, but thank you for asking.
This is a very, very cool pairing. I love this one.
You like this pairing? What do you like so much about it?
All right, so everybody's just tasted the beer, right? You get maybe a little bit of peppery note. Yeah. Taste it with the cheese now. It really amplifies that.
Takes it up to 11.
The finish, right? That's how cool cheese and beer interactions are. It's really wild.
Like when we first tasted this the other day to see what we were pairing with what, it was just amazing how that pepper element of the beer just bloomed. And the rest of the spices too. But it just bloomed, but in a very good way. Like not, it didn't get like, oh my God, burn your mouth out hot, right? It got like, wow, that's just a very pleasant, warm pepperiness. A very nice spiciness, which you kind of got in the beer, but it like...
Very cool.
It it just magnified it, and I think it was really kind of special.
Oh,
This
yeah.
cheese did the heavy lifting and the pairing also.
Point one for cheese. Not that it's a competition or anything. Yeah, I'm not always a huge fan of pepper, like spicier, peppery beers, but this is pretty darn good with this cheese. I think there might have been a question there in the back. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if you knew anything about the beer because I'm getting a very fennel taste, and I was wondering if that kind of played into it or if that's the pairing between the beer and cheese.
We all have to check if there's fennel here. Our beer judges, what do we
So
think?
the spice in this beer, Roxanne, is what? Remind us.
I'm just looking at
think it's-
at my cheat sheet here.
Coriander, yes.
Coriander. So
There-
coriander
yeah, there
and
is a
chili. So the interesting thing about certain spices, and even in beer, like some people taste coriander or certain acetaldehyde, which is generally thought of as a flaw in beer. It's a name of a compound, right? Whatever. Don't worry about that. Some people taste it as green apple. Other people taste it as cucumber. So that's one example how like individual physiology can affect the way certain flavors taste to you. And then in context, you add that in context, can be very different. Some people love coriander. Other people, it's like the most horrible thing in the world, right? So as you look at things, some people have blind spots. There's amnesia. Is that what it's called?
Yeah.
If I pronounce it right. Some people have blind spots in different areas of flavor and aroma. So if you're tasting something different, it's probably has to do, given that there's no fennel in here, it's either some of the spice from the yeast, it's like a spice being created by the yeast, or the fact that your personal physiology tastes things a little different. There's nothing wrong with that. It's more just recognizing that I taste this, as A, when other people might taste it as B. So it's not a problem. It's just being aware that your taste buds and sensory in your nose have a different association with it.
Like being a PTC tester versus sodium.
Right.
Yeah,
Why do you
my dad keeps saying that cilantro tastes like soap, but I mostly think he's lying because he doesn't tell the truth very often.
I think they call them super tasters, but just to make themselves feel better, because like
They're not that super.
Sorry? What?
oh metal, yeah.
Metal, okay.
There are some things to me that taste like aspartame. Tastes like metal to me. Absolutely. There's no sweetness at all to me with aspartame. So yeah, there are some very specific physiology things.
Can I talk a little bit about the cornerstone?
You can talk for any number of minutes about any number of cheeses
right.
that you have here.
So I think this is really cool. So Roxanne told you about the Missing Linck Yeast and how it's isolated, and we send it to all the breweries, and they make their own version of beer with that. Cornerstone it kind of mirrors that, and we talked a lot about terroir, and it's like, okay, like terroir and cheese, taste of place. How do you really tell the difference if you don't kind of set up an experiment where everything is the same except where it comes from? And so that's what they've done here. So we were tasting on the left Parish Hill Cornerstone, on the right Cato Cornerstone. These are two different creameries. One's in Vermont, one's in Connecticut, and they've isolated their own set of flora from their own farm, used their own use the same recipe with their own herd of single herd of grass-fed cows. Everything else is the same, right? Except the flora and the milk, but the recipe is exactly the same. And that is that is terroir, and that is how these two farms taste. And you can kind of taste them side by side next to each other, and I think they're really cool. The mustard that you have is a batch of mustard that we did special for the event. It's a beer mustard with the Brink version of Missing Linck. And I think that the mustard is a really kind of cool pairing with both the cornerstones if you want to taste it.
I think we all need to get this Missing Linck Yeast, like something nice for its birthday. It's been really giving. It's the gift that keeps on giving.
Make sure we don't.
I'm gonna throw another question to you, Stephanie. You know, the holidays are coming up. They are. You know, you laugh, but you know they'll be here.
We're already preparing.
Whatever you celebrate, it doesn't matter. You know, people are going to be hosting, even for summer, you're going to be hosting friends, maybe an ornery in-law or relative. Stephanie, what are some tips you can give everybody about how to create your own beer and cheese pairing?
Sure. So Chris said holidays, but beer and cheese can be enjoyed year-round. And like we have here, we've used a variety of cheeses. So we have both cow and milk. If there's sheep in there, that'd be great. So a variety of textures and milk types. And high quality. So you can buy cheese from the grocery store and cube it up, and probably people would be happy. But what makes it really interesting, of course, are the stories and the quality of these cheeses that match the quality and craft nature of the beer. So why would you have craft beer with just regular old cheese cubes, right? Like you want.
And where can you get those specialty cheeses from?
A little shop. Has anybody ever been to the Rind? Or any? Oh, cool. So you guys, yeah.
We got some Rinders.
Yeah. So it's right next to Finley Market. We specialize in these kind of artisan, kind of craft cheeses. They'll all have their own stories, and that pair really well with beer and cheese. So always start with high quality, different textures, milk types, and then a variety of beer too. And I'm sure Mary Ellen and Roxanne can talk a little bit more about how you might go about selecting some beer.
Yeah, how would you guys, so if you have your cheeses, you found your cheeses at the Rind per se. You have like 3 or 4 really good ones. How would you then think about pairing beers with those said awesome cheeses?
So I think we need to go to the next slide, right?
We can.
Yeah. So
Is anything
there's
prepared on?
There's a principle that you can look at. It's called the 3 C's. So complement, contrast, and cleanse. Oops, we missed an A there.
No, it's cleans.
Okay, cleans. Anyway, you can do, cleanse can be part of one of the others, so it doesn't have to be completely separate. Like you think about like a sorbet between courses as a cleanse, but you can do that. So complement would be where you have certain flavors that you might be matching in a couple things. So let's go away from cheese and think about, meat. And you might pair that with like a Rauch beer, a smoky beer, or with a stout or a porter or something like that. So you have very complementary flavors, like these strong, dark, intense flavors. Contrast, think about taking a blue cheese and pairing it with an IPA. Aha! Awesome pairing, because the IPA does 2 things. It has contrast and it has cleanse. Because that you usually in your IPAs you're going to have like a fairly high amount of carbonation. So blue cheese being very creamy and kind of sticking on your tongue, it's going to clean off your tongue, so that your next taste of blue cheese is going to be as pure. Your taste of beer is going to be good, and you're ready for the next course at the same time. So when you look at things, like think about the flavors you're getting in each of them. Are you trying to complement? Are you trying to contrast? And when do you need to get cleanse in there, which can be a separate, just like beer course, like maybe a Pilsner that's nice and bubbly and just cleans off your tongue, or a sour beer, or a Belgian that's going to just kind of help wash that stuff off your tongue. You can do some very similar flavors, you just need to do them with caution. If you have a very intensely sour something, pairing that with a very intensely sour something else is probably not great. If you have mild sours, pairing them may be fine, but if they're super intense, check it out beforehand and make sure it works. If you have like super duper peanut butter cookies and you're pairing it with a peanut butter porter, it might work, but maybe you want to pair it with a fruit beer, so to make the jelly part of it, or a wheat beer, a Hefeweizen, so you make the Elvis like banana peanut butter sandwich type of thing, right?
Oh, those are good.
I mean, so just think about it. When you think about these things, think about the flavors involved. Are you complementing? Are you contrasting? And when do you need to cleanse? And again, cleanse can be part of one of those other things. So back to anybody else who wants to add to that.
I guess like thinking about what we have here, like crackers could also be a very good cleansing item too. enjoy
Crackers.
in between?
We threw some pickled carrots that maybe some of you discovered. That's like a really nice kind of break in between the fat and the heavy, right? Like something like crunchy and acidic. So yeah, lots of ways to kind of cleanse.
And I love pickled vegetables. I pickle vegetables at my house, and it's just pretty. That's just good clean family fun.
Yeah.
Yes, we got another question over here.
Who makes the crackers?
These are sourced from an artisan cracker company in Wisconsin called Potter's Crackers, and we love them with cheese because they're very neutral, and they've got like a nice little crunch to kind of pair with the creaminess of the cheese.
So not like the flavor blasted goldfish. Get
Right.
like something
Right.
neutral. Got it. Let me write that.
We do have them. They're delicious. Oh, I'm so glad you guys like them. Good.
Yes, sir.
Which of these were you all focusing on when you were pairing the beers and the cheeses? 'Cause they definitely
Oh, but between these three?
between these species.
I think we tried to cover all three.
Yeah.
Generally, like when we looked at the creamier cheeses, we were looking something that could also cleanse. Because if you have something that's that coating and you don't add a cleanse, that then your next you either have to have a separate beer in between or something to cleanse the palate to take all that fat off your tongue. So other than that, it was basically what worked.
I think with this one that we just enjoyed, the fourth pairing, when we were all tasting together, Mike noticed that he thought that the fourth cheese had a little bit of spice to it. Maybe somebody's mouth kind of got a little numb, that had like a numbing effect. So his first thought was, let's do a kind of complementary pairing. He found this like very spicy beer, and it worked, and it brought out all of that spice together. So that's one way that a complementary pairing totally worked.
And I'll say from my personal experience, because I have less knowledge and experience than the other four people here on the stage, it was trial and error for me. Like I would try something, and I'd try something else to see if it worked. And for the most part, I was shooting kind of blind, but sometimes it worked.
So think of how much fun you could have for the pre-work for your party. Do this on your
very
own
good.
and do your own kind of
Yeah.
experimentation.
Have the party before the party.
And I'll say our mongers do a really good job. If you come into the shop and you say, I have these three styles of beer, where we have enough knowledge on our, even if not tasting, that we can theoretically offer some great pairings.
Their mongers are awesome. We're gonna move on to the final stop on this beer cheese train. Is our Urban Artifact Missing Linck with the Cato Cornerstones. So we'll let you guys tuck into that.
That is such a fun beer.
Oh,
This was the banana nut beer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is good.
Get the rest
you.
of that out there. Sorry, I meant to give it to you before I tasted it.
Thanks.
What do you guys notice?
Finger on your cheese.
You can taste the banana.
And the walnut.
It's got a lot of those ester flavors we were talking about.
I love that.
I also like, if you want to go back and smell the Cato Corner versus the other one for the Cornerstone, they just smell so different, and I think that heightens the rest of the experience for me.
Of course. Already finished it.
Say that again, sir.
So the Cato Corner is the producer in Connecticut, and then Cornerstone is the name of the cheese. And it's the last two cheeses on your plate there. So we had the Parish Hill Cornerstone and the Cato Cornerstone. Confusing because they're the same name of the cheese. It's a project, just like the Missing Linck, right? Like we have 3 Missing Links in front of us. Same idea. 2 different producers, same recipe, different farm. So that's why they're named the same, but 2 different producers there.
So Snow, I have a question for you. We've been talking a little bit about with Terra. Say that again, Stephanie. The
Terroir.
terroir. I don't speak French. And Urban Artifact does a lot of that themselves. They collect wild cultures, taking yeast from their local environment to brew their beer. How could that impart some specific flavors from like a microbiology standpoint?
Yeah, so microbes are really fascinating. They're the best thing, I think. If you just watch their behavior, you'd never be bored, and that's why. And why is that the case? Each microbe has a unique. If you look at it, really on the what we call molecular level, so if you go deep, if you look at their DNA, if you look at what they produce, they have unique structures, so they'll have unique DNA, and each DNA would code for unique proteins. The proteins is what determines what they do. So I say all this to say that, if you take any environment and you take the microbes in the environment, you'll have a unique signature. Each of them is going to be, you'll have a unique population, and as a result of that, also a unique signature. So when it comes to things like, if you're taking yeast or you're taking fungi, if you have a unique population, that unique population is going to confer those unique signatures to the yeast or whatever fungi, in this case, the yeast that you're using to make the beer, would also confer. So that's the reason why you would have such uniqueness. It's just a nature of microbes, basically.
So it's their own unique genes that allow them to do some things with some compounds that just make all these other cool, fun, delicious, tasty food.
Correct. It's just like humans. We have just unique genes and make us look different, and we're very unique in our ways. Microbes are the same.
That's awesome. Now that we kind of finished up that mostly fifth pairing, let's take some questions if folks have questions. I know people do. We'll start with this gentleman right over here. Yes, sir, nice and loud.
I had two questions. First one was could you talk more about the temperature of yeast as it's brewing in say the wort?
Yeah, I think that's a good question for Mary Ellen. Or Roxanne.
Yeah, I can share it with Roxanne
Yeah.
too. So there's if you just think about it very generally, you have your ale, the yeast that you use to ferment an ale, and then a lagering yeast. So if we're going back to those lagering cellars, they were using the yeast that fermented at a lower temperature. I think Roxanne can help me out with the exact specifics of what you want to control for. But yeah, it's just where they're kind of in their comfort zone. Obviously, as Sanu just mentioned, they can do a bunch of different reactions. So it's really about putting them in that environment where they're doing the reaction that we want, which is turning it into alcohol and carbonation versus some of the other ancillary things that yeast can do.
Yeah. So if you have a yeast that's designed for or grew up, evolved at a specific temperature, and you do it at a different temperature, you can get some off flavors. Probably the example most people would be familiar with is you ever get a hot, nasty fusel alcohol kind of beer. That means that it was a yeast fermented way above its temperature range that it really likes. So it's producing the wrong types of alcohols, and those are the kinds of things that give you headaches. I personally am super sensitive to fusel alcohols, so I know about that. But most lager type of yeast, you're in the 45 to 50 degree fermentation range. Cellar temperature, we're not talking refrigerator temperatures, we're talking cellar temperatures. And cellar temperatures generally are pretty stable right around 50 in most parts of the world, right? Even caves are stable at 50. Ale yeast, generally 65-ish. So we think of them as warm, but 65. But then you get Belgians, and you start them at 65 and they kind of go up, and then they produce all these cool things. And that's right for a Belgian. Kveik yeast, which are the Norwegian ones. Now you have this super cold country called Norway, and their yeast ferment at 95 to 100 without flaws. I mean, absolutely without flaws. And they just and they're done. But there's a history to that because they didn't have any way to cool, so they pitched them as soon as it was cool enough to be okay. And they actually didn't pitch yeast the way we know it. They take the yeast is embedded in a wooden ring, and they stick the ring in the fermenter, and it goes whoosh, I'm happy now, and ferments. It's kind of crazy. It's the weirdest yeast in the world. Missing Linck is kind of a little bit of an unknown. We assumed originally that Cincinnati, it's probably a lager yeast, but for those of us who were doing, we had a homebrew competition too, we started playing around, right? And part of the reason for the homebrew competition was what does this yeast do? What's it good at? What's it not? So some people fermented cold, in that 50 degree range. Some of us fermented whatever temperature our basement happened to be. Some people added a second yeast, raised the temperature. You know, if you were going to get bad things out of Missing Linck, that was, even with the other yeast in there, that was going to happen. And frankly, we got a whole lot of really good beer as part of this experiment. Unfortunately, not everybody can win medals on that, but we had 30 beers and we had 30 really good beers, which was kind of crazy for a yeast that nobody really knew how to use it and what it can do. So, you know, there's a lot of learning that happens on something like Missing Linck. All those other yeasts, there's a lot of known stuff, tons of like very detailed experiments. Missing Linck is kind of an open book, and the pros and the homebrewers in this community are helping learn, and we're still trying to figure out what's going on. But the fact that we've been able to make a bunch of good beers at a bunch of different temperatures is pretty awesome.
Did any of them win medals?
Yes, there will be medals awarded at 6 o'clock.
And this is the kind of citizen science I can get behind. And just to kind of piggyback a little bit on this, and Sanu, correct me if I'm wrong, is that temperature can really affect an enzyme.
Correct.
Depending, it's on the enzyme, it has a very specific range where that protein will fit the way it needs to fit, and that
Correct.
it gets too hot or too warm, it kind of falls apart or changes shape,
Correct.
and it doesn't do the reaction it's supposed to do.
That's correct. You got it right.
All right.
And I'll say, yeah, so rennet comes from cows, so you might imagine that it best works at cows' body temperature, and so that is most of the reactions for cheese occur at right around cow's body temperature.
Yes, sir.
So this is microbiome and cheese, I guess, when I was thinking of it. I know you want to put as much as you can to get the positive sort of microbiome, the yeast, bacteria, kind of mold going, but what steps does anyone really take to remove all the negative things that come in? Things that come in, like add lactic acid to your beer and then kind of ruin it or change the character of your cheese.
I can talk about the cheese first. So a lot of it is competition, and so if you have enough good bacteria and mold, then those will outcompete the bad ones. You might get some off flavors, of course, but usually, and there's a small war going on the cheese rind, and usually the good guys win out. But the beer, I know, is probably a little bit more nuanced.
Yeah, I mean, I feel for, like, if you're going to start brewing at home, sanitization is, like, the best thing you can do. Because you think about it, you're making, like, this really delicious brew. The wort is all these sugars that so many different microbes, but whether they be, like, yeast or bacteria, are very interested in using to their own end. So you can certainly start on the stovetop, but even when you get into that fermentation step and you're moving it into the bottles, the best thing you can do is sanitize those bottles before you pop your brew in there, because if you don't, it can be really
Things get
unpleasant.
Star San is your friend.
Yeah. Yes, sir. And then we'll get to you, ma'am.
Just kind of piggyback off what he said. So, with both cheese and beer, when do they become neutral? Like, they're going through the fermentation process. You're making the cheese. So, if I were to get some of the goat cheese, the very creamy stuff, if I leave it sitting in my refrigerator, is it going to continue to go that way? And beer is the same way, you know.
When the yeast population is kind of done.
When it just kind of becomes neutral, and they're not doing the things anymore. And I remember a friend telling me one time that he bottled some beer. Next thing you know, he had them sitting under the cabinet, and they were exploding.
Oh, that may be a difference.
They weren't done, I guess. But.
Well, let's do the cheese question first to you, Stephanie.
Yeah. So I mean, it's a continuum, you know, and so that's part of the cheesemaker or the affineur, their job and our job as cheesemakers, to release it when it is tasting its best, and then when it goes over that hump of best, right? Like it peaks in flavor, and then we call it the dark side, and then it's totally like the fermentation is really taken over.
For me to buy cheese and hold on to it, if I hold on to it too long,
so
it goes that way.
So once the cheese is cut, we call it dead. So once the cheese is cut, it is no longer continuing to do its thing. However, the afterglow, the third cheese, comes in a small little wheel that you could play around with a little bit of affinage in your fridge. And so, but once this cheese is cut, dead. But if you bought the whole thing and you know it's young because you've talked to the cheesemongers at the Rhine and they tell you we just got it, it's 2 weeks old, and you want to see what age might do, maybe you buy 3 wheels of it. You eat one in a week, you eat a second, in 2 weeks, and you eat a third in 3 weeks, and you kind of just see how the flavors have changed based on what's the micro biology of the cheese.
Plus, then you're really happy because you've had 3 wheels. You've had a wheel of cheese a week. You might need a salad after that, but that's your business. Let's talk a little beer. Yeah, if you want to
so
talk
from
about
a beer
that.
standpoint, it's a little bit different. So theoretically, and temperature and certain yeasts kind of play a different role in this, but theoretically, your fermentation will finish. You'll hit what we call a terminal gravity, so specific gravity of beer. Basically, it tells you how much sugar's left, how much has fermented out, how much sugar's left. You take a specific gravity, it hasn't changed in a while, you've had steady temperatures. Your beer is pretty much done fermenting. But now you bottle it and you add some more sugar, and there's some yeast in there. So that's when if you added too much, or if your beer really hadn't stopped fermenting when you bottle it, then you can have those explosions. Now, beer can age. Some beer can age, okay? If you have a light fizzy yellow beer, the worst thing you can do is keep it for very long. Okay, you don't want to age a Pilsner. You don't want to age a Helles. You don't want to age things like that. If you have a high alcohol beer, so we're talking like 8% or higher. If you have a sour beer, or actually a smoked beer, those beers tend to age well because there's other things in there that have helped preserve the beer. The alcohol, the pH, or even the smoking actually helps preserve the beer. There is still like a limit on how much, but it's not like real easy to say. I have had 25-year-old beers that have been absolutely awesome, and I have had 1-year-old beers that have been absolutely terrible. So it's a little bit of a learning the beer, specifically what it is. As homebrewers, we often do some aging intentionally, or oops, that was behind. And then we kind of find out which ones work and which ones don't. But those general principles, you put something in a barrel, you're probably going to want to age that beer because, generally the beer you put in a barrel is going to be kind of harsh going in. So you want some age after it comes out of the barrel to kind of mellow things out and smooth things out. But using those kind of perspectives, if I have a lighter beer that's high in alcohol and sour and I age it for a few years, the color is going to change. Doesn't mean it's going to be a bad beer, but it's going to be a different beer than it was when I first made it. So it's really hard to give you an absolute, but using that principle of alcohol level, sourness, or smoking, that's kind of a good rule of thumb for what's okay to be older.
Now, I kind of got a follow-up question here. So, Sano, it sounds like you're just kind of managing the microbes, right? Are there just general principles to help manage the microbe population? Because it's not like they die once they're done making alcohol or making cheese, right?
If we stop managing microbes, I don't have a job. And that's really what determines, in what we're learning in large part, what determines what. It's not just this principle of beer alone, and on a lot of other things, even in health and disease. It's just managing early on was mentioned good populations and bad populations. Yes, you can, if you know what makes the good population grow, sometimes it's just temperature, sometimes it's just the nutrients that they need, you can fiddle with the system so that good population grows. And so it's a constant battle that is raging all over us, within us and outside of us. It's the same, and I want to keep my job.
And that's a good segue. I know you guys still have plenty of questions, so we will all be here after we finish up for people to accost us with any number of questions or inquiries or curiosities. So I do want to take a moment to thank our panelists. You guys all did a fantastic job. I learned a lot. I hope you learned a lot. And again, we'll all be here for more questions and inquiries and to answer all your science things or just general good life advice. I also want to thank our breweries that have participated in this year's Missing Linck Fest, as well as the Ludlow Garage and Gaslight Properties for being awesome sponsors. Give it up for them. We also want to thank our hosts, Urban Artifact, and a very special thank you to Brett Coleman Baker and Mike Morgan. They're in the back. The indelible Mike Morgan. I looked up what indelible meant to make sure I knew what it was, and it wasn't an insult, so Mike is indelible. Not just for organizing this event, but just for this whole entire incredible weekend. And of course, thank you guys for being an awesome audience. You guys were wonderful. We hope you learned a little bit about microscopic life and what goes into making beer and cheese and good beer and cheese. So, and we hope you guys know how to do some pairings at home so you can do something just like this in the comfort of your own home. Everyone, my name is Chris Anderson. You guys have a wonderful night.
Everybody has the beers and cheeses that they had today and their little get cultured thing. I have a few extra if anybody needs anything. And I brought some cheese for sale. Come see me if you want to take anything home.
And if you haven't tasted that mustard yet, it's awesome.
I have some mustard too.
Real quick, also, this has been recorded on video, so look for this on the Radio Artifact YouTube channel at some point soon if you want to go back and take a look, because I know you guys are clearly a bunch of nerds. And the curiosity in this room is fantastic to see. So tell your friends, we're going to do this again next year. Appreciate you coming out to Missing Linck. Take care.
Can't get away from it. Well, that was like that stuff. You have access to all of
Yes, I have been there. They have all the German food. Yeah.
I hope he didn't drive off.
I do. She's like, that's have to worry about them killing you.
Pickled carrots.
Except for the chili and popcorn.
Yeah. You like a sauerkraut? Really? Sauerkraut's like it's like hotter.
I didn't like it at first, but then gradually.
Probably at the bar. Probably standing. Nobody cares.
During the beer,
Have you gone on any long trips on your bike? Gone on any long trips on your bike? Like this year? Since the weather got nice?
I rode up to Columbus and back.
It's a long bike trip.
Like what, like 2? Because I went through the back roads, it's like 2 hours-ish round trip, like, so like 4.
You got this too.
Oh yeah. Feel free to.
Do you guys have fun with this?
I thought it was cool.
The information was cool. Unfortunately, I was asleep.
Yeah, I was gonna say you look like you were wiped out.
The burger and
Oh
the
yeah.
beer.
And all the beer already.
That kind of got me. I was like, oh shit.
At one point, like halfway through, I turned to the car and said, "You think Andy fell asleep?"
Yeah. So no, actually, please have some of the cheese and the beer.
Or you take, you're welcome. Take the cheese with you. Take the tractors with you. The cheese was so good. I got the goat cheese and the Carakill, the force cheese, and I got some of the mustard.
Which I realized it was in the tray. I guess you guys took it. And then you guys took it.
Did you not get mustard?
Oh.
Oh. Huh.
It's all right. Which is fine.
Well, there's plenty here if you want to try it.
It's pretty tasty. But yeah, this was a fun little seminar.
Oh yeah. So again, here, please.
You take it. You eat it.
No, you guys, yeah.
See how this. Michelle and I have been dieting for the past couple of weeks. And so
I was gonna say you actually look slimmer than last time I saw.
I'm almost back down to what in the past probably 6 months I've been between like 206 and 220. So probably last time you saw me I was up to 220 or so, and now I'm back down to about 209.
Oh. I mean, what do you like? Did you change your diet?
We've just been counting our calories and keeping track of everything. I'm gonna go talk to the UC professor that's the C-diff specialist.
All right. Look.
My wife and I were sitting here like, let's not think about people things. That's not interesting. Yeah, right. We talked to somebody about it in the past year or so. We're like, this is super interesting.
I feel like really blessed that I have like a good bio.
Right. Yeah, you got to be happy about your gut when you hear about. You hear about the people, the few brewers that are like, I'm going to take yeast from my beard and ferment with that.
Oh, yeah, like the guy from Rome.
Yeah, right, yeah. You're like, what is going on there?
That was...
Yeah.
Because if you're using that,
Oh no. Yeah.
And oh my god, it went
Naturally, kettle souring beers there's such a high tendency for that to go bad.
That's funny because I made a goat cheese memorial
Yeah.
People, like, somebody said, just like my grandma got France. I'm like, awesome. And it literally so good. That's how strong the aroma was.
I wish I had the capacity to brew to use a cool ship and see what natural yeast I have to brew with.
Yeah, that's right.
Like, 5 gallons is not enough to do a cool ship.
I mean, I even like put like there were like actually people like say monster.
Back.
Yeah, and like
like blue cheese does a migraine sort of.
Oh. What was that about? Couldn't find where the table was. Looks yellowish. Is it water? Did you like get some of their peanut butter in your water? Oh, whatever that is. Did we have pause at all? Can I try this one? I am going Michelle slammed her water down on the table and like there's not that much left.
Oh no!
I thought these were really good. We had that one. That's
I remember that one.
that's the one you had at Humble Monk. Cartridge Enigma. So we had. What happened? We had that.
I remember this. By the time I woke up, we were down here. Hold on. Let me get my hands on.
There's probably alcohol. Yeah, probably
Sasquatch. We just recently went to Pikes Peak, so awesome. There was all these Sasquatch statues.
No, that's cool.
It's not as bad here as Untitled.
No, it's next time.
Like Urban. Or she'll sell me any cheese.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'm trying to stay the same. Awesome, thanks. Good seeing you. I was gonna try that.
I'm barely pushing 5. I've been, I think all grain I've been 3 years. I love it. I saw that. It almost has more of a saison funk than tried the quad yet.
I tried the
Oh,
quad. The only problem with
okay.
the quad is
But it is in a smaller glass.
You can't fault it. You can't fault it for being.
We got all three. Yeah, thank you guys. Roxanne, you're phenomenal.
What cheese?
I mean, my cheeses don't compare, but it's still
You guys did get in with cheese. So. What's this Eric cheese?
I also came back with a water, which I spilled. So,
Try again.
that's all that.
Get any of Andy's banana?
I'm okay. I have an open tap now.
Okay.
And no water. I spilled the water. I didn't spill the beer, though.
That's good. It's important.
Yeah. You can go back and get water for free. Get the pay for the beer. Put the beers in your bag.
I figured to walk out with the beer.
You think?
Yeah. Are you gonna take the rest of the cheese?
You think I should?
Yeah, absolutely. Why would you not?
Think I should finish these beers?
If you want to. I feel less convinced that you can finish the beers than taking it to pieces. It's a rare event where I think the cheese is more important to have than the beer.
Well, they just have beer and beer pairing.
I think it's just called flight.
Oh.
Who was telling us about legal transplants?
I don't know.
Scott.
Oh, it wasn't him.
Can we take these or leave these?
Okay, that makes sense. 'Cause he's wearing lettering, and when they talk, it sounds like they were together.
Yeah.
So that makes all sense.
Should we take these?
Yeah, I mean,
Who's going to drink them?
I'm not going to.
I will probably drink.
Nuts. I got two.
What's up, man?
Hey, nice work.
Thanks.
How do you think it worked?
I think everyone who,
You had like awesome, like intense
yeah, everyone
You
was.
guys got mobbed for it, so it's great.
Yeah, everyone had gave great feedback. So they said they had a lot of fun, learned a lot. It was good.
Sticks like cheese in here, though.
Yeah,
In the best possible way.
probably. And it's not you, so there you go.
No, it's great.
Especially after right now, heavy suit.
Yes.
Yeah, we're like Stephanie's out here. Do you want some help, Stephanie?
No, already got help.
I got you. Is it alright if I leave my bag in my bag on the other side?
That is a candy question.
Really my book bag kind of like behind that table.
This is really dead. Yeah, isn't it great?
This is totally different than
Isn't it awesome? Dude, this is fresh one. Hot, I'm getting tired, but I'm doing good.
You guys want help clear your tables or anything?
No, no.
shit, bro.
My sister-in-law like spilled water all over our table, so I feel obligated to.
I'll take care of the water. I don't want to clear anything up yet because I don't know where the hell I'm going to put everything. So
Okay.
I know it's going to be a mess for the home rewards, but it's just going to be a mess.
I came over here in like 8 feet.
Dude, you're good. You pay money. You don't need a help. I took heat.